There are people in our lives who behave as if they have unrestricted access to us, to our time, our attention, even our silence. They call it love. They call it family. But what they really mean is entitlement. And the more we allow it, the more we disappear in the name of keeping the peace. You say no and they act offended. You set a boundary and they accuse you of changing. You try to protect your space and somehow you're the selfish one. But let me say this clearly, love without respect is not love. Kindness that comes with conditions is not kindness. And relationships that drain you are not your responsibility to maintain. I once worked with a man named Calvin, retired, soft-spoken, the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and always offered to help, even when no one asked. But every time his sister called, something inside him tensed. She never asked how he was doing. She only called when she needed a favor, a loan, a last-minute babysitter. And whenever he hesitated, she guilted him. "You're the only family I have left. You know that, right?" So he kept showing up, quietly, reluctantly, resentfully. Until one day, after driving across town for the fourth time that week to fix her sink, he sat in his car and asked himself, if this wasn't my sister, would I still be saying yes? That question changed his life. Too often we confuse obligation with loyalty, we confuse silence with maturity, and we confuse endurance with love. But boundaries are not betrayals. They are acts of self-respect, the kind that protect not just your time, but your identity. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most disciplined Stoics in history, once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If we constantly live in survival mode, shrinking ourselves, biting our tongues, absorbing disrespect just to avoid confrontation, then what color do we become? We become tired, hollow, small. The truth is, setting boundaries doesn't mean you love someone less. It means you love yourself enough not to abandon your values. It means you finally see that your worth isn't measured by how much you can tolerate. I'm not here to tell you to cut everyone off or burn bridges without reflection. I'm here to tell you this: you're allowed to redefine what connection means. You're allowed to ask, does this relationship uplift me or does it quietly break me down? And you're absolutely allowed to choose peace over performance. There will be people who won't understand, who will call you distant, cold, or even ungrateful. Let them. Their discomfort is not your cue to shrink again. In fact, it's proof that your boundary worked. Because real love adapts, it doesn't manipulate. Real respect adjusts, it doesn't punish. So if you've ever walked away from someone and felt smaller, if you've ever replayed a conversation wondering if you were too sensitive, if you've ever smiled through a moment that made your stomach twist, this message is for you. You don't need anyone's permission to protect your peace. You don't need to explain why your energy matters. And you certainly don't owe unlimited access to people who confuse closeness with control. There are 7 behaviors we'll explore that quietly destroy your self-worth. They often wear the mask of family, friendship, or even love. But once you learn to recognize them, you won't unsee them, and you won't tolerate them either. Let's begin. Have you ever shared something that truly hurt you, only to be met with a shrug, a laugh, or worse, a casual, "You're too sensitive"? That moment when your pain is minimized, brushed off like it's just a passing mood or a weakness you should have outgrown, it leaves a scar deeper than most people realize. I once spoke with a woman named Lorraine. In her early 60s, she had lived most of her life trying not to be a burden. She told me about the countless times she tried to open up to her husband about her fears, about aging, about losing her parents, about feeling invisible after retirement. And every single time, his response was the same. He'd flip the channel to a comedy show, chuckle, and say, "Why don't you just laugh it off? You think too much." It wasn't just his words, it was the message behind them. Your feelings are inconvenient. Please keep them to yourself. What Lorraine experienced isn't rare. Many of us have heard similar lines. Don't cry over something so small. You're just overthinking. Other people have it worse. These comments might sound harmless, even well-meaning. But let's be honest, they don't comfort us. They silence us. They teach us that our emotions are not valid unless they make someone else comfortable. Over time, this kind of dismissal chips away at something fundamental: our trust in ourselves. You begin to wonder, was I really overreacting? Or maybe I am too emotional. And just like that, your inner compass, the one that tells you what feels wrong, what crosses the line, what hurts, gets muffled. You stop trusting your own signals. From a Stoic perspective, this is not strength. This is suppression. Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, once said, "Respect your ability to reason, but also honor the emotional truth that flows from it." In other words, emotions are not the enemy. They are messengers. To ignore them is not resilience. It's denial. And here's the hard truth. People who constantly downplay your feelings are not trying to help you feel better. They're trying to make themselves more comfortable. They don't want to hold space for your pain because doing so would require effort, empathy, and sometimes accountability. So instead, they offer quick fixes. Just get over it. Don't dwell. You're making it a bigger deal than it is. But your pain is not a performance. It doesn't need their permission to be real. So what do you do when your emotions are repeatedly dismissed? You start by validating them yourself. When something hurts, you say it. Even if no one else listens, you listen. Then you start surrounding yourself with people who don't make you feel ashamed for having depth. You stop explaining your sensitivity like it's a flaw and start treating it like the strength it is. Because the ability to feel deeply, to process honestly, to care, that is not weakness. That is awareness. The next time someone tells you to stop thinking so much, ask yourself this: why does my reflection make them uncomfortable? And then remember, you don't owe anyone emotional silence just to keep things smooth. You're allowed to think deeply. You're allowed to feel fully, and you're allowed to walk away from anyone who treats your emotions like background noise. You are not too sensitive. You're just no longer willing to be emotionally invisible. And that is the beginning of your real strength. Have you ever started doubting yourself? Not because you were unsure, but because someone made you feel like your memory couldn't be trusted? Like maybe you misunderstood, overreacted, or just imagined the whole thing. That quiet erosion of your confidence, that slow undoing of your sense of truth, that is gaslighting. And it's one of the most dangerous forms of emotional manipulation precisely because it doesn't shout. It whispers. Let me tell you about Kevin. He was a thoughtful, steady man in his late 40s. A software engineer who prided himself on being rational and composed. But when he talked about his relationship with his long-term partner, his voice shifted. He told me how, over the years, she began twisting details in subtle ways. Arguments they had, she claimed they never happened. Promises made, she said he was imagining things. When he tried to bring up an issue again, she'd smile and say, "Kevin, you're remembering it wrong. You always do this." Eventually, Kevin started recording their conversations, not to accuse her, but to convince himself he wasn't going crazy. That's what gaslighting does. It doesn't just blur the truth, it replaces it. It turns solid ground into shifting sand. It makes you question not just what happened, but who you are. And here's what's truly insidious about it. It often comes disguised as calmness, logic, even love. I'm just being honest. I care about you. I don't want you to keep embarrassing yourself. These phrases seem harmless on the surface, but underneath they carry a weapon: doubt. And when someone repeatedly makes you question your own reality, you slowly begin to outsource your truth to them. You stop trusting your gut. You second-guess your decisions. And eventually you become someone who apologizes for things you didn't do just to keep the peace. Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic emperor, once wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong, I'll gladly change. But I will not give up on truth lightly." The Stoics didn't chase comfort, they chased clarity. To them, truth wasn't a feeling or a mood, it was a discipline, a compass. And when someone manipulates that compass, they're not helping you navigate. They're trying to take the wheel. So what can you do? First, stop trying to win the argument. Gaslighters aren't looking for resolution. They're looking for control. The more you explain, the more material they have to distort. Instead, start observing. Journal what was said. Write down how you felt. Not to confront them, but to reconnect with your own reality. Then test your truth. Share your experience with someone you trust, someone outside the fog, and listen to how your story lands. That validation can be the first anchor back to solid ground. Finally, set a boundary, not with anger, but with intention. If the pattern continues, step back, not because you hate them, but because you've remembered you matter too. Gaslighting isn't always easy to spot and even harder to leave. But here's what I want you to hold on to. Your mind is not a battleground. Your memory is not up for debate. And your experience, however quiet or complex, is still yours. You don't need permission to believe what you saw, what you felt, what you know. Because truth, as Marcus Aurelius reminded us, doesn't scream. It stands, calm, clear, and unshakable once you return to it. You've doubted yourself long enough. Now it's time to come home to what's real. Have you ever noticed how some people always seem to disappear when you need them the most, only to reappear the moment they need something from you? It's not always loud. There's no shouting, no obvious betrayal, just a quiet absence until your usefulness becomes relevant again. I once met a woman named Denise. She had just gone through a difficult surgery and was confined to her home for over a month. During that time, not a single friend visited, not a call, not a text. But 3 weeks into recovery, one of them, Jake, messaged her, not to check in, but to ask if she could help edit his resume. No, how are you? No, do you need anything? Just a task. That moment hit her harder than the surgery itself, because it confirmed something she'd been trying not to admit. Some people are only around when it's convenient for them. And the truth is, this kind of dynamic is more common than we think. You get the promotion, silence. You achieve a personal milestone, they're too busy to celebrate. But when their world falls apart, suddenly you're their first call. This kind of selective presence is a form of emotional neglect. It sends a message: you only matter to me when I need something. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that, you know how deeply it cuts. You start questioning your worth. You wonder, am I lovable beyond my usefulness? You begin shrinking your needs, withholding your ray, just to avoid feeling like a burden. And here's where it gets dangerous. When it becomes a pattern, you might even start believing that this is normal, that being unseen is simply your place in their world. But Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, warned us about this. He said, "Do not bind yourself to those who see you only as a harbor in their storms, rather than a soul of your own." That means your value is not measured by how available you are during someone else's chaos. You are not a shelter built solely for other people's emergencies. True connection shows up, not just in crisis, but in celebration. It asks, "How did your day go?" Not just, "Can you help me move this weekend?" It listens without taking inventory. It's present without being transactional. So what can you do if you recognize this pattern? First, take an honest inventory. Who shows up when you're not struggling? Who claps when you win? Who notices when you've gone quiet? Then ask the harder question, are you keeping space for people who only remember your name when their life gets hard? You don't need to confront them with anger, but you do need to respond with clarity. That might mean creating emotional distance. That might mean saying no to the next favor. Or it might mean stopping the cycle entirely. And if guilt creeps in, remember this. You are not rejecting them. You are reclaiming yourself. Because one-sided relationships don't just waste your time. They erode your spirit. And the longer you stay in them, the more you start to believe that love has to be earned through sacrifice. But it doesn't. You deserve reciprocity, not perfection, not constant attention, but presence, mutual presence. So the next time someone disappears during your winter and comes back expecting your spring, pause. You're not being cold, you're being conscious. And there is nothing more stoic, nothing more dignified than choosing the relationships that honor your full humanity, not just your utility. Because you are not a favor. You are not a fallback. You are not their convenience. You are a whole person. And that should never be conditional. There's a kind of criticism that doesn't sound like an attack. It sounds like concern, like helpfulness, like someone just being honest. But over time, it doesn't help you grow. It makes you shrink. I once spoke with a woman named Tessa. She had been working in corporate training for over a decade, brilliant at what she did, deeply passionate about helping people learn. But every time she presented a new idea in meetings, her supervisor would say something like, "That's ambitious. Maybe a little too ambitious for someone with your style." Or, "Your voice doesn't really command a room. Have you thought about letting someone else present next time?" At first, she brushed it off, but months turned into years. Eventually, she stopped offering ideas altogether. She sat quietly, avoided eye contact, and only spoke when directly asked. And here's the thing. Tessa didn't lose her confidence. It was chipped away, one comment at a time, masked as feedback. That's what this behavior looks like. It's not explosive. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't insult you outright. It offers a soft jab wrapped in concern. And because it's subtle, you question yourself instead of the person delivering it. The dangerous part isn't the comment, it's the repetition. One remark about your appearance, then your tone, then your dreams. Eventually you stop trusting your own instincts and start editing yourself in advance. And often this kind of criticism doesn't come from enemies. It comes from parents, partners, bosses, people who claim to know you best. They'll say, "I'm just trying to help," or "You're too sensitive," or "Don't take it the wrong way." But if the help always leaves you feeling smaller, then it's not help. It's erosion. Let me be clear, There's a difference between constructive feedback and chronic criticism. One aims to lift you up, the other aims to put you back in a box, usually the one they feel most comfortable keeping you in. From a Stoic perspective, this is the very moment where awareness becomes a responsibility. Epictetus taught that while we can't control the behavior of others, we are fully accountable for what we continue to tolerate. And every time you absorb repeated undermining comments without drawing a line, you send a signal, not just to them, but to yourself that your worth is negotiable. So how do you tell the difference between real feedback and disguised discouragement? Ask yourself, does this make me more capable or more afraid? Does it challenge me to grow, or does it warn me not to try? And most importantly, would I ever speak to someone I love the way this person speaks to me? If the answer is no, then it's time to set the boundary. You don't need to argue. You don't need to prove them wrong. You simply need to reclaim your voice, one brave word at a time. Speak when you have something to say, not when it's safe. Share ideas even when they feel too big. And remember, people who truly care about your growth won't use your insecurities as leverage, because the world already has enough critics in a disguise. What it needs is more people who refuse to apologize for being exactly who they are. So the next time someone offers you a kind remark that makes your heart sink, pause. You're not being difficult. You're just no longer available for the kind of feedback that's really just fear in a mask. That's not resistance. That's respect for yourself. And it's long overdue. Not all lies sound like betrayal. Sometimes they sound like promises. Warm, reassuring, empty. And when it keeps happening again and again, those broken promises start to sting more than the truth ever could. I once met a man named Arthur, steady, kind, the kind of person who always showed up when he said he would. But in his marriage, he was constantly being let down. His wife would say, "I'll be home by 7, and show up past 10. She'd promise they'd have a weekend just for the two of them, only to cancel at the last minute. Birthdays, plans, small moments, all forgotten or pushed aside with a casual, "I didn't mean to," or "it just slipped my mind." None of these were massive betrayals, but over time, Arthur said something that stuck with me. "It's not that I stopped trusting her. It's that I started doubting myself for ever believing her in the first place." That's what repeated dishonesty does. It doesn't just fracture the relationship, it fractures your own sense of reality. You begin to question your memory, your expectations, your worth. And worst of all, you start making excuses for the other person. "She's just busy. It's not a big deal. I'm probably expecting too much." But here's the truth. Reliability is love in practice. Words without action aren't affection. They're decoration, and the more someone lies, whether it's direct, by omission, or through selective forgetfulness, the more they teach you not to count on them. That erosion might be slow, but it's real, and it's deep. Seneca, one of the wisest Stoic philosophers, once wrote, "Truth is the first lesson of friendship." He didn't say perfection. He didn't say agreement. He said truth, because trust cannot exist without it. A relationship without truth isn't a relationship. It's a performance. One where you're constantly guessing the script and never sure if the other person is even reading from the same page. So how do you recognize chronic dishonesty when it's not obvious? Look for patterns. Do their actions match their words? Do the stories change when questioned? Do they offer apologies or just explanations? And ask yourself, how many times have I forgiven something I never really understood? How many promises have I stored quietly, hoping they'd finally come true? Because here's what I've learned. People who lie repeatedly aren't just making mistakes. They're setting a precedent. And if you allow it, they will continue to treat your trust as disposable. That doesn't mean you need to become bitter or suspicious, but it does mean you need to become clear. Stop listening to what they say and start watching what they do. Stop waiting for change and start deciding what you need to feel safe, steady, and seen. And when that clarity comes, act on it. Maybe that means limiting your exposure. Maybe it means redefining the terms of your connection. Or maybe, sometimes, it means walking away entirely. Because the only thing worse than being lied to is convincing yourself to live in a story that was never real. You deserve more than lip service. You deserve honesty, not just in the grand gestures, but in the little things, the follow-through, the consistency, the respect for your time and trust. Don't let habitual dishonesty train you to expect less. That's not love. That's erosion. And you weren't made to be worn down by someone else's carelessness. You were made for truth, and the people who truly love you won't hide behind promises. They'll prove them. Some people will cross your boundaries and call it love. They'll overstep, intrude, push too far, then say, "I'm just trying to help." But not every kind gesture is actually kind, and not every act of help is helpful. Sometimes it's control disguised as care. Let me tell you about Maya. She lived in a quiet neighborhood and had always had a close relationship with her Uncle Ben. He'd been there since she was a child, supportive, present, and well-meaning. Or so she thought. After Maya got her own place, Ben started showing up unannounced. He had a spare key from when she first moved in and had helped her set things up. At first, it was little things, dropping off groceries, leaving soup on the counter, fixing a leaky faucet without asking. But then one day, Maya walked out of the shower and found him already in the living room, scrolling through her mail. She was startled, embarrassed, and when she asked why he was there without calling, he just laughed. "You know, I'm only looking out for you," he said. "You should be grateful someone cares." The next week it happened again. That's when she realized this wasn't love. It wasn't concern. It was a boundary violation wrapped in affection, a subtle message. Your space doesn't fully belong to you, not if I want access to it. And here's what's so difficult about these moments. They're hard to name, because they don't always come with cruelty or harsh words. They come with favors, smiles, guilt. But if something leaves you feeling unsettled, even if the person swears their intentions are good, that's your inner warning system speaking. As Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, wisely said, "You may not control all that enters your door, but you are the gatekeeper of your soul." And I'd add this, you are also the gatekeeper of your space, your time, and your emotional bandwidth. Boundaries are not walls. They are not barriers to connection. They are the structure that makes healthy connection possible. And people who truly love you will learn where those lines are and honor them. But those who want control will pretend those lines don't exist. And when you finally speak up, they'll call you sensitive, dramatic, cold. Because what they really mean is, how dare you take back what I assumed was mine? So how do you deal with this? Start by recognizing the pattern. Ask yourself, does this person respect my no? Do they ask before stepping in, or do they assume? Do I feel more relaxed or more watched after they leave? Then get clear, not defensive, not angry, just clear. You don't need to justify your need for privacy. You don't owe anyone constant access just because they're family or close. And when your boundary is met with guilt or shame, that's not a relationship issue. That's a respect issue. Real care doesn't barge in. It knocks. It waits. It listens. And if someone continues to violate your space after you've spoken, that's not forgetfulness. That's a choice. And you have the right to make one too. You can change the locks. You can limit the visits. You can say no without guilt, because your peace is not up for negotiation. Your home is not a revolving door, and your boundaries are not suggestions. They are statements of self-worth, of clarity, of quiet power. And the people who deserve to be in your life will never try to walk through a closed door. They'll wait, they'll knock, and they'll respect the answer you give. There's a kind of insult that doesn't sound like an insult. It sounds like a joke, a laugh, a tease, and yet it leaves a bruise that humor was never meant to cause. Have you ever been the punchline of someone else's laughter while everyone else chuckled and you sat there frozen, not sure whether to smile or walk away? Let me tell you about Claire. She was invited to a family reunion after years of avoiding them. She finally decided to show up, hoping maybe things had changed. But just as she was pouring a drink, her cousin Tim called across the table. "Well, look who made it out of her cave. You're still single, huh? Thought for sure by now someone would have taken pity." The room erupted in laughter. Claire forced a grin, but something inside her shut down. That night she didn't sleep, not because of the words themselves, but because of the applause they earned. Because she realized it wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. The jokes always had her name on them, her weight, her career, her choices. And whenever she pushed back, the response was the same. "Relax, we're just playing." Or worse, "Come on, Claire, you're too sensitive." But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. If the laughter only goes one way, it's not a joke. It's a jab, wrapped in a smile, delivered in front of an audience, and masked as love. This kind of disguised disrespect is one of the most accepted forms of emotional abuse in our culture, especially in families, especially in long-term relationships. People use sarcasm like a scalpel, not to heal, but to control. They'll say, "I'm just being real," when what they really mean is, "I'm testing how much I can get away with." And here's what makes it even more dangerous. It teaches you to question your own reaction, to laugh through pain, to accept humiliation as a form of bonding. But Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, once wrote, "Words should be used like medicine, to heal, not to harm." Real honesty, the kind rooted in care, never leaves you feeling smaller. It doesn't cut, it clarifies, it lifts. So how do you respond when someone keeps using humor as a shield for cruelty? Start by refusing to play along. You don't need to smile at what hurts you. You don't need to explain why it wasn't funny. You simply need to name it, calmly and clearly. That didn't feel respectful. Not as a fight, but as a mirror. If they laugh again, if they deflect or blame you for being too sensitive, then it's time to take space, because you're not dealing with a misunderstanding. You're dealing with someone who's comfortable using your insecurities for sport. And that's not love. That's power play. Real connection doesn't ask you to betray your dignity to fit in. It doesn't demand silence in exchange for belonging. And it certainly doesn't turn your deepest wounds into party entertainment. So the next time someone says, "Come on, it's just a joke," ask yourself, why am I the only one not laughing? because your laughter should never come at the expense of your self-worth. And your presence, your spirit, your story, your voice is not material for someone else's punchline. You deserve to be spoken to with care, not with cruelty wrapped in a smile. And anyone who doesn't understand that doesn't deserve your silence. We were taught to be pleasant, to keep the peace, to let it go for the sake of harmony. But no one ever taught us that honoring our own truth might make others uncomfortable, and that it's perfectly okay. Because being true to yourself isn't an act of rebellion, it's an act of respect. Respect for your time, for your peace, for the quiet voice in you that says, I don't like how this feels. Somewhere along the way, we were conditioned to believe that protecting ourselves was selfish, that standing up for our boundaries was dramatic, that being hurt by subtle disrespect made us too sensitive. But what if the opposite is true? What if knowing your limits isn't a weakness, but a strength? What if saying no without guilt is actually the beginning of inner freedom? What if your discomfort isn't something to hide, but a sign that you're finally starting to hear yourself again? I once spoke with a man named Joel. He was the kind of person everyone leaned on. The helper, the fixer, the yes man. But after years of being everything for everyone, Joel found himself sitting in silence at his kitchen table one night, wondering, why do I feel so invisible in my own life? And then it hit him. He had been trained to please, but never taught to protect. He had mastered how to keep others comfortable, but had forgotten how to ask himself, am I okay? So today I want to speak to the part of you that's tired of laughing at jokes that hurt, tired of being polite when something feels off, tired of keeping quiet just to keep others happy. That version of you deserves a different kind of power. Not loud, not aggressive, but steady, quiet, rooted. Start small, say no without an apology. Call out a comment that crosses the line. Take a step back when someone doesn't respect your peace, not with anger, but with clarity. Because dignity is not something you earn through silence. It's something you reclaim through self-awareness. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. But I would add this, if it is not respectful, do not accept it. You are not difficult for needing space. You are not overreacting for feeling disrespected. And you are not weak for finally choosing yourself. You've spent enough time explaining your boundaries. Now it's time to enforce them. Because self-respect doesn't require permission. It only requires practice. So if this message resonated with you, take it as your invitation to begin again. To step back from what drains you and move toward what honors you. And if you're ready to keep building a life that feels solid, centered, and fully yours, one choice at a time, then stay with me on this journey. Subscribe to the channel for more grounded, Stoic-inspired insights like this. Share this video with someone who's learning to choose peace over people-pleasing. And most importantly, leave a comment below and tell me, what's one boundary you're ready to protect starting today? Because your story matters, and your voice, spoken or written, might be the light someone else needs to hear tonight. You are not too sensitive. You are simply waking up to what you've always deserved. Now go live like you believe it.